Hello, 7th grade. This is Miss Reeser here. For your assignment today, you're going to be doing Lesson 12, numbers 1 through, I need to check here, 1 through 28. So that will be your assignment today. Your story is continuing on. Both Maria and her children and Hans are on the right side of the border. They're in West Germany, so they are safe, but they still have not found each other. They're still not together, and in the next couple of chapters, they have some really important decisions to make, and when to deciding which direction they're gonna go. So this the title they give you for this lesson is An Unpleasant Choice, and that indicates that they have some hard choices that they need to make. And after I'm done reading some of these chapters too, I'll talk a little bit about some of those choices. All right, so I'm going to read chapters 23 and 24 to you, and then you can read chapter 25 on your own. All right? Chapter 23. It was another delectable spring day. 20 minutes before time for services to start, Maria, Hansi, and Rosie, their heads bowed reverently, entered the building which the MCC rented for church services, almost losing one another in the host of worshippers. Starved for spiritual food and the warmth of Christian fellowship, the refugees filled the sanctuary far in advance of every service. They often started singing as much as half an hour before the meeting was scheduled to begin. And this was no ordinary meeting, for it was a farewell service for the large group of men, women, and children who were finally to sail to far-off Paraguay on the SS Charlton Monarch. Maria was glad that there were still a few seats in the rear of the building. Although she was now strong enough to be steadily employed at potato peeling for the camp kitchen, she did not feel like standing. Rosie, crisp in the new dress assembled from the two old ones, snuggled close to Maria. Hansi, noticing that there were already women standing in the rear of the room, politely gave up his seat. Standing was no hardship for him. "I'll meet you outside," he whispered huskily, and was gone before Maria had time to answer him. The song leader, Herr Reimer, observed the rapidly filling hall, became restless to start the singing. Standing behind the improvised pulpit, he announced the first song while many were still coming in. Großer Gott, wir loben dich. Everyone leaned forward intently to catch the words as he read the first line. Holy God, we praise thy name. Lord of all, we bow before thee. Then they sang the line after him. The lack of songbooks gave impetus to this old tradition of the Mennonites in the Ukraine, the leader reading each line ahead of the singing. Maria gazed around to see how many of the group sitting near her she could recognize as those who were to leave for Paraguay the following day. Some of her friends in the camp itself would be moving out tomorrow, and she had acquainted herself with a number of women who were living in the school building. There was Frau Hem in front of her. Maria felt sorry for her, partly crippled and with only one son left of her original family of 3 children. Frau Hem had confided her troubles to Maria when they met in the park a few weeks before. "My son is so skeptical," she had complained. "He was in a glum mood about the ship having to be postponed, and I told him that prayer was all he could depend on. And then do you know what he said? 'Prayer hasn't helped me for a long time, Mother.' I tell you, that hurt me more than I can say." She had wiped her eyes. If only he would find God and join the baptismal class before we leave. Besides Frau Ham, there was a row of grandmothers whom Maria was certain she had seen at the temporary quarters. Imagine beginning a new life on another continent at the age of 60, 70, or more. And the MCC made it clear that life in Paraguay would not be easy. there would be jungles to clear, Indians to befriend, houses to build, wells to dig, and gardens to plant. Looking at Rosie by her side, Maria wondered if she and her children would pass the stiff physical examinations for entrance to Canada. After a number of interviews with the MCC, she had come to the conclusion that the letter from Tanta Erica was the leading of God. Thus, they planned to go ahead with the processing for Canada. They hoped that should Hans later come to Gronau, he too could emigrate, since he had never been in the Secret Service, but only the regular German Wehrmacht. But if the door to Canada should close for them, what then? Could they, with the help of the rest of the colony, endure the hardships of frontier Paraguay? Maria would never take a step like that until she was sure Hans was not somewhere in Germany. A thrill crept up her spine as Maria thought of the three couples who would be united in Paraguay with the arrival of the Charleston Monarch and the trip inland to that little country. In each of these cases, one spouse had gone to Paraguay in 1947 on the ship Volendam, believing his or her partner to be dead. Now, though, through the efforts of MCC, their spouses had been found and were coming to join them. It was not hard for Maria to imagine the dramatic reunion. Dear brothers and sisters in the Lord, Maria's ponderings came to a hasty close, for the camp minister had ascended the platform with two of the MCC workers and was beginning the service. We have come together to praise God and bid farewell to a large group among us whom we have learned to love, for whom our prayers rise to our Heavenly Father as they journey forth into the unknown. The aged minister adjusted his glasses and held his Bible up in a better position. But they do not go alone, nor do any of us go alone. Whether God takes us to Canada, or to the USA, or to Paraguay, or should he will that we remain in this land. For we have a shepherd of our souls, a loving Father, a guide and comfort, a God in whom we can trust. Brother Thiessen endeavored to hold his Bible a little more firmly so the audience would not notice his quivering hand. Then, through his tears, he read slowly and distinctly in the beautiful Luther translation, the 23rd Psalm. Let us pray, he said simply when he had finished the reading, and glanced down at the tear-moistened eyes of the audience. A heavy silence, save for a few audible sobs, filled the room as the old faithful minister prayed, his voice pouring out words of intense gratitude for God's guiding providence in the past, for their safety at the moment, and for the hope which they had for the future, both temporarily and eternally. Then he prayed for each individual who would leave their midst for the last leg of their journey from the east to the sinking sun of the west, and for each family that would begin a new home in that faraway country. It was a long prayer, but no sound, not even the whimpering of a child, broke the awesome silence. When Maria lifted her eyes after Brother Thiessen's prayer, she saw that Frau Hum and many other women were still praying. The members of the young people's choir had stood up from their places in the west corner of the building. She saw Elfrida in the front row, her eyes fixed on the young man who stood before the group with arms upraised for the downbeat of the first selection. And she saw Franz, too, in the back row, his dark eyes looking blacker because his face was so pale. When at last I am home, when at last I'm at home, every storm will be over when at last I am home. The group sang softly, and as they hummed, the young director's clear tenor voice soloed the chorus. Always the chorus was singing songs about home, Maria thought, and they sang them with a wistful interpretation that only homeless refugees could put into music. Even the children were deeply touched. A little 9-year-old who, with her mother, had been brought to the camp to be emigrated with the group, tried to give a lovely poem that her mother had written for the occasion, but she only managed to get through the first 2 verses. The words which described the heartaches of the trek and the loss of the child's father were not difficult to memorize, but were almost impossible for the child to recite. As the program proceeded throughout the afternoon, MCC workers addressed the spellbound audience, repeating the experiences of groups they had transported earlier on the good ships Volendam and General Stuart Heintzelman. They described the pioneer existence of the settlers and the need for faith in God and brotherly cooperation to make the new colonies successful. This land, the government of which had given permission to the MCC to bring in Mennonites, offered a safe haven to the long persecuted refugees. It offered a hospitality which overcrowded Germany could not extend. Accommodations and transportation were primitive, but every man could, at least figuratively speaking, dwell under his own vine and fig tree. Mennonites known the world over for their century of experience in agriculture, had been promised freedom of conscience, even non-bearing of arms, if they would settle and tame the Chaco wilderness. But as the MCC workers stretched, everything depended upon a sharing of burdens, brotherly love, and an unquenchable faith in God. When the final prayer had been offered for the safe keeping of the departing wayfarers, Maria and Rosie were joined outside by a thoughtful Hansi. They decided to take the long way back to the clubhouse, the path that led through the beautiful city park. As they walked in silence, each absorbed in his own thoughts, Hansi suddenly blurted out, "Say, Mama, do we have to go to Canada?" "Why, son, we may not even be able to go. But don't you want to if you can?" "Oh, I don't know. We've been studying about South America, and especially Paraguay, since so many were getting ready to go there." "Yes, teacher said she thinks we refugee children understand geography better than any other children because we've been so many places and have so many connections," Rosie added proudly. Maria smiled. "But Hansi, why do you want to go to Paraguay?" "I don't know. I can't exactly say the reason in so many words." He stuck his hand in his pocket and took on the casual mannerism he had picked up from Franz. "It's just that I guess it takes a man to brave the wilderness down there. That's what Franz told me the other day. You know, Indians to befriend, and stumps to dig out, and wild animals to kill, and all sorts of adventure. I know I'd like it." They had crossed the bridge spanning the river and were following the path through the small zoological section of the park. Stopping to admire the peacocks, Rosie asked, "Are there peacocks in Paraguay?" "No, don't you remember, Rosie? Peacocks are from India. But there are lots of other birds and animals in Paraguay. I wish I could earn enough to buy a gun to take along if we go." Maria chuckled. She was afraid she did not share the boy's ambition to brave the wilderness of Chaco. Not without Hans at least. But she liked the evidence of manhood she saw in her son since he'd begun associating with Franz. She laughed privately at the way he walked like Franz, at the many times he quoted his older cousin, at the way he tried to control his changing voice. "And you know, Mother," Rosie said, enjoying the opportunity to show off her own knowledge of a distant land, "they don't eat potatoes down there. They don't even grow them. They raise a plant called mandota, or something like that." "Not mandota, mandioca," Hans corrected. "You get things so mixed." Abruptly, Hans stopped, his hands propped on his hips. "I'll say he's a woman hater! I'll say he's a woman hater!" he exclaimed in a shocked, disgusted tone. "Just look at them!" But Franz and Elfrida, hand in hand, never saw their audience. They seemed already to have been transplanted into another world. Chapter 24. The day was a sad one for Maria. When she had arrived at Grona and been put to bed to rest for the first long months, Katharina had been in the bed next to her. Katharina, too, was discouragingly ill. She, too, was a refugee mother who had endured hardships and who had faint hopes of emigrating to Canada. But now Katharina was dead. She would not emigrate to a new home in America, for she had made the journey to her lasting home. Death, That old familiar monster had claimed another of Maria's friends. She had loved Katharina. They had talked together of many things. They had shared confidences. Today, however, Katharina's 3 little children, the oldest one only 9, sat silently and uncomprehending in the front row of the chapel. The little edifice where they held the funeral service sat sedately back from the road, semi-hidden by bushy trees, its tiny wooden framework symbolically constructed to point heavenward. From its outer walls, warmly clothed in lustrous ivy, to its rough but graceful interior, the chapel seemed to speak in soft, comforting words. Painted in gold letters in the front of the room was the scriptural promise, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Softly, Maria walked to the front door of the chapel to look once more at the form of her friend. The unfinished casket, the scarcity of the flowers, and the black crepe-paper dress trimmed with a white collar gave evidence that the homeless woman had died in poverty. But Maria, remembering Katharina's unselfish spirit, knew that her friend had been rich toward God. Again, the young people's choir sang songs of home, as they had done a few days before at the farewell service for the Charlton monarch. But this time it was different. The words took on a new meaning. Could it be, Maria wondered, that refugees spend too much time dreaming over their past and future homes on the earth, to the point where they forgot about their eternal home? Home, after all, is not merely structural, she thought. It is wherever your loved ones are. The tears came as she remembered that most of her dear ones were in heaven, her mother, her father, her brother and sisters perhaps, and then Lenny. Hans? No, she felt sure he was alive, but where? Katharina's death seemed indeed untimely. Had not a great tragedy come to her, she would have been caring for her children for many years to come. But as Maria remembered her, Katharina had been an old woman. Lying in the camp hospital, she had described the tragic day in the trek when she had so nearly frozen to death. Since that time, she had been but a shadow of her real self, the people she had so much longed to be. Maria dreaded this service, for funerals were hard for the refugee, bringing back into sharp focus scenes that time had blurred, opening wounds that time seemingly had healed. But after the minister read the jubilant words of hope in the resurrection from 1 Corinthians 15, Maria felt comforted. She had almost forgotten that death is swallowed up in victory. Forming a long procession behind the horse-drawn hearse, they walked the quarter mile of gravel to the gravel road to the cemetery, passing the large Lutheran church. As was customary, the church bells began ringing as soon as the funeral procession was within 100 feet of the church. The graveside services were not long, and Maria began to look for a companion for the walk homeward. She had noticed the woman in the chapel and had wondered why she was alone. Seeing that the friends she had come with were no longer there, and that this stoop-shouldered stranger was only a few yards ahead, Maria hurried to catch up. "May I walk with you?" she asked, smiling through the tears that were still in her eyes. The woman glanced up at her, surprised. "Oh, I guess, if you want to." "Of course I do." She had emphasized the "want" in such an odd way that Maria had the feeling she should reassure her. "I have seen you several times, but I can't think who you are. What is your name?" "Tessa Braun. I don't get out very much. My son Anton usually goes for our food. My husband works at the factory. I have been assigned some sewing that I ordinarily do in my room. That's why you don't see me so often, I guess." "How old is your little boy? I have a son, too." "He's 14, but he's only in the 5th grade. Had to stop school too often. Couldn't keep up." "I know how that is." Maria smiled at the woman again, noticing that she spoke very broken German and seemed miserably uncomfortable and self-conscious. But Frau Braun did not return the smile. Instead, she continued almost as though she were talking to herself. "He hates being in the same class with children so much younger than he is. He's little for his age, but it still makes him angry. The teacher doesn't like him either." It finally dawned on Maria who Frau Braun was. Only this morning, when the conversation around the potato kettle had deteriorated to gossip, the Brauns had been up for discussion. He was a Mennonite, but had married a non-Mennonite Russian woman. The woman, they said, was shiftless and unfriendly. Maria had been ashamed of the unkind things that had been said about her. Fraulein Bartel seems like such a nice teacher. Perhaps if you got better acquainted with her. Frau Braun shrugged her shoulders. They had come to the clubhouse, and she turned to go to her room by way of the veranda. I don't get acquainted very easily. You are all Mennonites. You have your own dialect. I cannot understand nor speak it. You have your own customs. I do not understand them, so I am not one of you. And without another word, she was gone. Looking after her helplessly, thinking what she should have said, Maria did not notice her son until he tapped her on the elbow. Mamma, do you know who that is? My goodness, Mother, why are you talking to her? She gazed down into his stubborn eyes and saw that she was in for an argument. Oh, whoops, I missed some. Why, that was Frau Braun. What in the world do you mean? She gazed down into his stubborn eyes and saw that she was in for an argument. And surely the street corner was no place to stage a verbal battle if there had to be one. She led the way to their room. She is Anton Braun's mother. She is a Russian, too, and Anton is the worst fellow in class. He doesn't cooperate. He teases the girls. Maria had had enough. She could do little with discrimination against this poor woman, but she was not going to have such unkindness in her own family. Now listen, son. There is nothing wrong with Frau Braun that a little kindness won't help. She needs a friend, and someday I'm going to go over and make a call. And what's more, you ought to be nice, Anton. Nice to Anton. Rosie had entered and listened curiously and could no longer be quiet. I'll tell you why Hansi doesn't like Anton. I'll tell you. The teacher put him next to Irmgard, and Hansi lunged forward, grabbing one of Rosie's braids in his fist, but she continued. Irmgard and Anton talk in class, and today he walked her home. She darted out the blanket entrance, Hansi close behind her. That's why he doesn't like him. That's the whole terrible truth. Sound like good siblings to me. So, actually, we didn't get into the choice that they're going to make, so I'll leave that for next time. But think about what is home for you. And I would like you to write a short paragraph on that. What is home for you? What is your definition of home? And how do you think your definition of home is different from what a refugee's definition of home would be? Okay? So that's just a short writing assignment along with your lesson 12. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday.